5 days into the NFL free agency, and one of the strangest stories of the offseason is still the fallout from the Maxx Crosby situation in Vegas. Last week, the Raiders had pretty much agreed to send Crosby to the Baltimore Ravens for 2 first-round picks, and things had progressed so far that Crosby had come out and recorded the video about how excited he was to join the Ravens. But then ultimately, he failed his physical and the deal was done. And then Crosby comes out the next day saying that things happen, nobody knows the truth, and he's all in with the Raiders. Now, look, that might be true, but once a team shows its willingness to move a franchise player, that kind of situation just doesn't disappear overnight. So today, we're going to look into the whole deal, why it fell apart, what the fallout could be for both sides moving forward. We'll also look at the biggest winners and the biggest losers of the free agency so far, and then we will introduce a new segment on the show, the Sunday Standard Power Index, where we begin ranking every team in the league from the bottom up. And finally, we'll continue to build out our 2026 NFL draft board, taking a look at who I believe will come off the board from picks 11 through 15. So let's get into it. This is the Sunday Standard.
Welcome to the Sunday Standard.
Welcome back to the channel. This is the Sunday Standard. I'm your host, Anders. Got a lot to get through this episode, so let's get into it. Now, last week, we kicked off the episode with me saying, look, I've had to refilm the whole episode because of the Maxx Crosby situation where we thought that he was heading to Baltimore. Now, a week later, here we are talking about why he didn't. So let's get into that. Now, as we know, the Raiders had pretty much decided to ship off Max like he wanted to another team. He didn't want to be with the Raiders anymore, and ultimately they got what he deserves in the return for 2 first-round draft picks for this season and the next from the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the fact is, Max was only off crutches for about a week. He had the surgery on his meniscus early January, and according to the doctor that did the surgery, on all accounts, he was tracking as per he should be for his recovery and to ultimately be lining up there on the defensive side of the ball week 1. However, obviously, the Ravens have seen enough for them to realise that potentially that may be an issue, and they're not willing to give up their future 2 first-round picks to go and get Max. Look, that may be just what they're saying. General manager's come out and he said, we're really disappointed that it didn't go through. We still love Max as a player, but ultimately the bigger picture for the franchise is that they didn't want to go out and spend that. Look, they pivoted. They made this signing with Trey Hendrickson for the 4-year, $112 million that can blow out to about $120 with bonuses and is a guaranteed $60 million contract. And you didn't have to give up your 2 first-round picks. Now, that's all well and good, but I guess the issue here is, yes, Trey Hendrickson is also an elite rusher, but he is a little bit older. He did have injuries early on in his career, so you have a few issues there, and maybe, look, he continues to be healthy and continues to be a player for the next 4 years that you need on that defensive side of the ball when you are playing teams like the Steelers and the Browns twice a year when you've got a TJ Watt and a Myles Garrett on that side of the ball as well. So ultimately, I think the Ravens got what they wanted. Maybe it was a little bit controversial. We've seen it happen in the past, especially with the Ravens. They do back out on things, but ultimately, I think both parties pretty much got what they wanted. I think the Raiders will be happy that according to Max, and we will only ever know, Max will be the only person to ever know how he truly feels to be back in the black and white there in Vegas. However, I think it is the right move for everybody involved. Will teams be a bit up on edge dealing with the Ravens in the future? Potentially. They do have a track record of this. Does that affect any trades moving forward for their franchise? Potentially, but we will see. Now, with that news out of the way, let's move on to the winners and the losers of the free agency so far. Firstly, starting with the winners, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Really love what they're doing here. They've gone and got DK Metcalf, a running mate, with Michael Pittman Jr. signing a 3-year, $59 million deal. I really like this. He gives you an option in that short to medium range, inside the hashes type plays. DK is that deep threat. He's been super consistent. 5,254 receiving yards since joining the league in 2020. That sits him at 17th. So he has the ability to just pick up yards, those sort of medium range passes, picking up the first downs and marching your way down the field. Gives further options to whoever may be under centre, whether that be Aaron Rodgers, whether that be someone that I think they should go and get in Will Levis, considering the Titans have gone and signed Mitchell Trubisky as the 2 for Cam Ward there this week as well. So I think you go and maybe get a young Will Levis who still has a lot to give in this league. I think he's due another chance. I think that would be a good signing on their behalf. And also a great signing in Rico Dowdle. Now, the Cowboys didn't want him. He's gone to the Panthers last year. He's had another 1,000+ yards. Obviously, Chuba Hubbard on and off with injury, so he's really come in and just had some huge games and absolutely deserves the number one job there in Pittsburgh. Obviously, the Pittsburgh Steelers have now moved on from Kenneth Gainwell. He had a lot of workload on him, 73 receptions, 486 receiving yards out of the backfield. I think with the addition of Michael Pittman Jr., you can just look to having Dowdle as a true running back, not having to pick up those extra yards in the short distance yardage situations. So I think really love what the Steelers have done this off-season in free agency so far. Moving on to my next pick for winners of free agency. And speaking of the Carolina Panthers, it is them. Look, you've gone out and you've got Jalen Phillips. You needed help on the rush. You've signed this kid. He's still young. Obviously, a career riddled by injury. The fact that he's come back from being medically retired to then coming into the league, again, dealing with injuries early on in his career in Miami. He moves on to the Eagles for 8 games last year, halfway through the season, continues to prove himself, and then he gets rewarded with $120 million over 4 years down there in Carolina. Really like that. You've also got Devin Lloyd there as a linebacker. It fills out that issue that you're having in that secondary. So I really enjoyed the signings across the board there. They did rate second last in pressure rating last season. So you fix a few major key issues there on the defensive side of the board. And number 3 of winners of the free agency so far, it certainly has to be the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, with the fallout of the Crosby situation, you do retain Max. That is a major key point to take on board. You thought you had an extra $30 million in cap space with moving him on. Ultimately, that hasn't happened. You've retained him. He is one of the best defensive players in the league. There is no doubt about that at all. But then you've gone and got extra players to help who we assume is going to be Fernando Mendoza on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball, whilst keeping Maxx Crosby. So they're massive winners. Firstly, Tyler Linderbaum. He's, I would ultimately say, probably one of the best centers in the league. Look, you're paying him a little bit more than ultimately I think he should have gotten. $9 million more than Creed Humphreys, who was the highest paid center on about $18 million. You've signed him for $27 million a year. Is that an overpay? Potentially, but you need to build out this offensive line for Fernando. So when he comes in, he feels comfortable because he's the speed difference between college and the pros is significant. And he will need time to adjust to that. So bringing in a player like Linderbaum certainly helps. And you've also filled out your secondary. Nakobe Dean, Key Walker. 2 really good additions. Both from Georgia. Both won nationals championships. You needed help on that in that secondary. So I think, again, 2 really good signings. And finally, for my 4th winner of the free agency so far, the Tennessee Titans. I love where this organisation is heading. I think they've finally turned a corner. They've got their guy in Cam Ward under centre. He's going to have a big sophomore year. I love everything. They've come out with their new outfits, the new rebrand of the whole organisation. You've got a new stadium coming. I really like this. Wandale Robinson. Is he a true wide receiver one? Maybe not. Is 4 years, $78 million, 38 of that guaranteed a little bit too much? I think it might be. I would have preferred to have seen maybe a $60 million with maybe 28 guaranteed, but we'll see how it happens, see what happens there in Tennessee, and ultimately I think they go and find some good players as well in the draft. You've also added Alontae Taylor and John Franklin Myers to your list of players. Again, filling key gaps as they continue to build. It's not going to happen overnight. We've seen that with many organisations over the years. It does take time, so I really do enjoy what the Tennessee Titans are doing there. And obviously, with the emergence of DK last year as well, in the wide receiver room, I really, really like where they're going. Anyway, where there's winners, there also has to, unfortunately, be some losers. And firstly, one of those is the New York Jets. Where do we start? Geno Smith. I just don't see why you would go to Geno for a player that came out while he was in Seattle and had finally revived his career and ultimately said, they wrote me off, but I ain't right back though. Why would you go back to signing a player? Look, did Geno find himself in a bad situation there in Vegas? Ultimately, yes, I think he did. Can he go back to what he was in Seattle after Russ left? Maybe. He's a lot older. He's 4 or 5 years older than that now. I don't see the signing there. I think you could have got yourself someone that didn't have history with the organisation and ultimately gotten you through this year, because this is just a gap year for the Jets. They don't expect to be any better, and they won't be. I don't arguably think they will win more than 3 to 4 games again this year. And that's the decision that they've made with now looking to the future and looking to next year, ultimately where they find their, hopefully, a quarterback of the future in a heavy quarterback class. And you've also gone and signed Demario Davis. He's a 37-year-old. Look, don't get me wrong, Demario Davis has been consistent across the board. He's still throwing up all-pro numbers, and I can sort of understand why you brought him in. He's not the answer, it's just short-term gaps. So you've got the 2 pick. I'm still high on Caleb Downs. I still think he's the guy you go and get. I'm seeing a lot of Arvell Reese's. I just think Caleb Downs just is a better pick. But anyway, we'll see who they go with there at the 2. And finally, my other, 2 more picks on the losing side of free agency so far. Secondly, will be the Green Bay Packers. They've lost so many players in this free agency. You've lost your 2 in the quarterback room in Malik Willis. He's off to Miami. You've lost Key Walker, who I just spoke about. He's gone to the Raiders. And you've lost Rashawn Gary. He's gone to the Cowboys. And you really haven't. You've re-signed a few smaller guys just to fill spots and really haven't done anything explosive where you need, again, to get sort of out of that mid-tier level team to make a difference. Hopefully Jordan Love stays healthy this year, so you don't have to worry about the quarterback room and who's going to be the 2 there. So, look, you've had 2 failure long-term deals that you had. You had Nate Hobbs. He had a $48 million contract signed last year. Ultimately, he got injured, and you've shipped him off, waived him. He's gone to San Fran. You've also had Aaron Banks, $77 million, 4 years, injured as well. So your roster's taken hits. You haven't made any major moves in free agency. I don't understand where this organisation is going either on that front. So again, I think they turn to the draft and see what they can do in that sort of area. And finally, my last loser of free agency so far has to be the Arizona Cardinals. Now, they've lost Kyler. We all knew that was sort of happening. I ultimately thought they would have kept him for another year and had you go to the draft next year and get your quarterback of the future, like a lot of teams will be doing. But ultimately, he's gone and signed a 1-year deal with the Vikings. You have signed Gardner Minshew, who had the knee injury there with the Chiefs, which wasn't as bad as we all first thought, which was great. But now you've got Brissett and Minshew fighting for the QB1 position, and you've signed Tyler Algier, but you've re-signed Connor. So you've got 2 running backs there. You've signed a wide receiver 3 in Bourne. You've got 2 weapons in Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr., but Jacoby and Brissett and Gardner Minshew aren't top-tier echelon quarterbacks that you're going to get what you need out of those 2 guys to be competitive in a league where ultimately you failed last year with Kyler. Jacoby Brissett was average at best, and now you really haven't gotten that much better. So I don't really like what Arizona have done there either, but we shall wait and see to what happens in their draft area as well. Now, the new segment here on the Sunday Standard Power Index, your normal power ranking. We're giving it a special name, put my twist on it, call it what you want. Each week we will rank the NFL team from the bottom up, overall direction, the roster strength, where I see them landing sort of throughout the year. So let's start off with the bottom of the league. And these 5 teams that I'm going to list off shouldn't surprise anyone. They are 5 teams that are at the bottom, and they're in whatever sort of stage you want to call, whether it be a rebuild, whether it be roster purgatory. But this is the list from 32 to 28. Starting off, the Cleveland Browns. That shouldn't surprise anyone. You've got 5 quarterbacks in your quarterback room. You don't know what you're going to do there. Are you going to go with Shadur? Are you going to go with Deshaun Watson? Is he going to come back? You're paying him $240 million over 5 fully guaranteed. Still one of the worst signings I've ever seen. Look, Deshaun was great in Texas. He was great. I had high hopes for him. And then everything happened. And ultimately, he's gone to the Browns and he's been injured. Can he still perform at a high level? I guess we'll wait and see. But unfortunately, with the Browns, I just don't see them again having a good year this year, and they'll end up at the bottom of the rankings probably for the most of the year. But look, who knows? They might surprise me. 31st in the Sunday Standard Power Index, got the New York Jets. Now, like I said, I'm just not sold on the Geno idea. They haven't really improved. You could ultimately say they've maybe improved a little bit on the defensive side of the ball, but ultimately you go out and get a Caleb Downs, hopefully, and that improves again a little bit on the defensive side of the ball, but ultimately you don't really have too much. Look, you've still got Breece Hall, you've still got Garrett Wilson, they're still decent options, but I don't see them improving, unfortunately, off last year. They look towards next year, as many of these teams on this bottom 5 of the Power Index will be. Moving on to number 30, the Miami Dolphins. Look, I'm not sold on this team either. I think they are also ultimately in a post-tour era. Yes, you have signed Malik Willis. Is he the answer? It's yet to be seen. You've given him a lot of money for someone that hasn't really done much. He had a good few games last year. I don't think he's the answer there in Miami, though, unfortunately, but it'll get you through the next couple of years while you look to the future there in the quarterback room. You've got the 12th pick, I think, in the draft. Ultimately, you've gone and signed a Tutu Atwell. You haven't really done much more. It's a rebuild stage. 30, I think, is where they sit, and I don't think they go any higher than that, if at all. 29, the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, I really enjoyed what they've done this free agency, like I said previously. However, they are still rebuilding. It is still a long way for them to get to where they want to be. It takes years and years of development. Fernando Mendoza, look, here's plug and play. You put him in, he plays. You have to keep him healthy. He has to get to an NFL standard. He has to understand the pace of the game. So I think they're still a few years away from sort of being up there in the top 15, in the better half of teams in the league. And finally, number 28, Arizona Cardinals. Look, Jacoby Brissett did enough last year. The addition of Gardner Minshew is an interesting one to fight for the number 1 job under center there in Arizona. I don't see where they're going. So we'll see. But again, I think Arizona remains sort of down the bottom this season, unfortunately, on the Power Index. So, and finally, like we have done for the first 2 episodes, we will go into the draft picks that I believe will be coming off the board for picks 11 through 15. So let's get into it. The Miami Dolphins. Sorry, I said that they had 12th. No, they've got the 11th pick. And with that pick, I think they need to go and get a cornerback. They're very shallow there on that side of the ball. A lot of youth and not a lot of talent, unfortunately. I think you go and get Jermod McCoy from Tennessee. Look, Miami Dolphins need help everywhere across the board. There's no doubt in that. There's no one arguing that they don't, but I think that's a good place to start. Get a McCoy type player, see what else you can find, some gems in the draft in those latter rounds, and then look, see where you go. But I don't think this is the year, unfortunately, for the Dolphins, like I said. So go and get McCoy. Look, ultimately, the Dolphins, this might bring PTSD to Dolphin supporters. The 2001 draft where you ultimately decided to take Jamar Fletcher at 26. The Chargers took a Drew Brees. A couple of years later, ultimately, you could have signed him. He went to sign for the Saints, ended up being a Hall of Famer. You decided to go with Dante Culpepper. We'll leave that at there. Pick number 12, the Dallas Cowboys. Jerry does what Jerry wants to do. I think they go and get Kedrick Falk out of Auburn. Obviously, you've lost Micah Parsons. Kedrick Falk was one of the better players on a struggling Auburn team last year for our college watchers. He was one of the shining lights, unfortunately, for an Auburn team that were very, very poor last year. But his explosiveness, he's 6'6", he's 285, he's a developmental pick. But his upside and his ceiling, I think you can bring him in and develop him into something special. So that's who I have Dallas going with at 12. Pick 13 is the Los Angeles Rams. Now, you could ultimately look towards going and getting a Ty Simpson from Alabama as a backup quarterback. Is this Matt Stafford's last year there in Los Angeles? Is this the end of him? I've watched him since he got drafted. That was probably the first draft that I ever watched. You've done some good things in free agency. I really like where they're at as well. You've gone and got Trent McDuffie. I think that was a missing piece. Obviously, you've lost Kirby Durant through to Dallas now. I still think you get more support on that side of the board. I think they also take a cornerback, and I think they take Colton Hood from Tennessee. Super productive last year, 50 tackles, an interception, forced a fumble, and a fumble recovery. Over 10 games there for the Vols. So I think that's really where they should go. I think they can probably pick up a quarterback next year or maybe find another cheap quarterback off the market as well, potentially in free agency either this year or next year, but we shall wait and see. Pick 14, obviously the Baltimore Ravens, keeping that with the falling out of the Maxx Crosby trade. They need to continue to build out that interior offensive line. I think you go and get a Vega Ione from Penn State. Look, you've lost Tyler Linderbaum. You need to help just rebuild that offensive line. Give Lamar a little bit more help there. You're still paying him a lot. You've rejigged his deal. You've freed up some cap space, but ultimately you do need to protect him. He is not getting any younger. And finally, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Cassius Howell is your pick here from Texas A&M. He is one of the best edge rushers in the class, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have not had a player with more than 8 sacks for the last 4 seasons. So ultimately, I think the SEC Defensive Player of the Year is someone you go and get. There is obviously concerns around his arm length and his size. Ultimately, you can see the upside of his sheer explosiveness on the edge. I think his pros outweigh his cons, and you go and get a edge rusher there, Cassius Howell from Texas A&M. So that rounds out picks 11 through 15 in the upcoming draft. We've got a lot more to talk about next week, and as we lead up to the draft in just over a month, and the free agency continues to unfold. What other deals are going to be made throughout the week? Who's going to sign where? So you'll find that all here on the Sunday Standard. So we'll see you next week. Cheers.